Hey guys, welcome back to another video. As you can tell by the parts across the desk, it is building time again. So last time we did a full-size case build, it was an absolute monster. This time we're going to go for a small form factor in the case. That is the Dust 2 from Cougar Gaming. They've kindly sent out some other parts as well. This case can actually take an AIO and a full-size power supply, so I'll tell you more about that as we go throughout the video. We've also got some other hardware from Gigabyte, 3070 I'm going to put in this, and then a RTX motherboard. And then we're actually going to be using the Ryzen 7 5800X, which has very kindly been sent out by scan.co.uk. They do absolutely everything relating to hardware, displays, even some pro grade stuff on there as well. I actually built my first PC using parts I bought from Scan back in 2010, so it's a real pleasure to now be working with them, kind of come full circle. So I think that's enough waffle for now. I'll cover the parts off in more detail as and when we need them, but let's just start and crack on with the build. So we're going to get our processor, storage and also our RAM onto the motherboard, then we can get that in the case. There are a couple of things you do need to consider though with the Dust 2, is that it does take an RTX motherboard rather than M-ATX or an ATX. So we've got the Aorus B450 Pro Wi-Fi for this one. Now it is a slightly older board, but we're using a Gen 3 NVMe, and also the riser cable in the Dust 2 is also Gen 3 as well, so it's not going to matter too much that we're using the B450. I have updated this to the latest BIOS as well, so it will support the 5800X straight out of the box. So let's get this out and installed. So the 5800X is a 8-core 16-thread processor, base clock of 3.8 GHz. Now this motherboard is going to lift up the little lever on our socket, and I'm going to insert it to the right hand side. Typical rule of thumb for AMD motherboards, goes a 90-degree clockwise turn when you've got the motherboard in portrait. The only exceptions to that are motherboards from EDA, so generally speaking you can follow that rule. So our storage is the Viper VPN100 M.2. This is a 1TB variant. It's a Gen 3 drive, but I used it a couple of builds back and it's a really fast performing drive, so we're going to have no problems with gaming or doing video editing or anything like that off of it. And as you can see, we have got a heatsink on our motherboard, so I won't be using that in this case, but if you really want to use it, you could of course just take the heatsink off your M.2 and then put it in. So right hand side in first, and then we'll hold it down and then screw in the same screw, obviously minus the heatsink, but it's not going to make much difference for us here. Last but not least, our memory. This is Viper Steel RGB from Patriot, two 8GB for 16GB total and 3600 megatransfers. I'm going to do the bottom slot first, and then the top. 3600 is actually the real sweet spot for Ryzen as well, so the processor will definitely make use of that speed. So everything's now on our motherboard. Now we can get our case out and have a look at that. So here is our case, the Cougar Gaming Dust 2. Very weighty, rugged style as well. Nice carry handles on the top and the back if you want to take this to a LAN event maybe. As I said, it takes a full-size power supply. We can also fit an AIO in this as well. There is a little bit of a limit on the size of the power supply. This is my 1000-watt Cougar I'm going to be using in another video. This won't fit just because generally over 850 they get a little bit longer. I will put the maximum dimension on the screen. I'm pretty sure it's 160mm. So let's open her up. We have got some torque screws to actually take off the side panel. Now if I undo these clips along the top, that will take off the top metal panel, and then that also allows you to get to the magnetic dust filter, so you don't have to take loads of parts off to be able to clean this, which is quite nice. So now we've got the torques off, we can take a look inside. Nice padding on here as well, will help with any vibrations. So first of all, we've got our riser cable on this side. This is where our graphics card is going to go. As I did say earlier, it is a Gen 3, so make sure you run your motherboard at Gen 3, otherwise you're not going to get it to boot. Other things, we've got our I/O, so there's a power button, reset, headphone and microphone jack, USB-C, which is nice, and then a USB-A port. So then taking off the opposite side, we've got our placement for power supply and then also our motherboard. You can see the riser cable will connect in down like this. Then as I said, we've got space for a full-size power supply, SSD mount on the back here. There's also one on the front as well if you want to install any 2.5-inch drives, maybe for your Steam games or editing cache or anything like that. So I'm going to get our cooler ready now before we install the motherboard into the case. This is the Cougar Gaming Aqua 240 ARGB. Very good price to performance cooler. We used the 360mm variant in a build before, and it did us very proud. So let's get this open. This has got support for AM4 11.5X. I'm not sure this supports 1700 out of the box, so that might be something you have to check if you are going to go Intel 12th gen. So inside we've got a couple of ARGB fans. These are the Vortex VA120s, fully controllable as well. We have got a remote in this bag here. Cooler itself, and then we've got some mounting hardware for our radiator, let's get this out. Also a quick side note, if you're going to be using an AIO with this, the maximum height you've got is 55mm from the top of the IHS on the processor. For anyone wondering, the 240 Aqua we're using is 50mm high. So this comes out of the box with the Intel bracket on it, so we're going to need to swap this out. Very simple case of sliding that one off, going in our little bag of tricks and then finding our AM4 bracket instead. It looks like this one here. So we've got our pump upside down, and then we're going to put the bracket with the clips facing down. That just slides on and clips in, and that's ready to install our little loops to go onto the AM4 motherboard. So this packet here has got Intel and AM4 mounting options, but we're going to be looking for these kind of like little L brackets with holes in. So we've got 2 of those, and then we're going to be getting 2 thumb screws. So we're going to take our little L brackets with the pump still upside down and put them so the hole is furthest away on each side. So once we put one of those through each side, just a case of putting the thumb screw on. Now I only recommend you put those thumb screws on until they're just threaded, as we're going to need a bit more play to get it around that mounting hardware on the motherboard. So swapping things around, we're going to take out the JB120 fans that are in the top, as we've got some nice flashy RGB ones, so we just as well make use of them. And there we go, that's our other fan. Now we are using a smaller form factor case, so we do need to think about the orientation we're going to actually put our AIO in, and the tubes are only so flexible, we're not going to be able to get them in certain ways. So for this one, we're going to have to go with the AIO tubes to the front of the case, and then we shall be installing it like this essentially. So I've laid the cooler down on the table in the way that it's going to be installed into the case, and then we're going to put these fans in a push configuration, because it's going to give us the most play with the radiator hose, purely because if we were to put them on the top, we're going to have a lot of pressure on the hose, and I'm not really comfortable with that. So putting them the other side, that does allow it to go further into the top of the case, gives us a little bit more play. So I'm going to put the text towards the back of the radiator, then I'm also going to put the cable downwards. That means that will go onto the side with the graphics card, and it should make cable management a little bit easier. So I've got our fans laid on, and then we've got our mounting hardware in a separate bag. And then we're obviously going to need our long screws to go through the fan into the radiator. So there we go. I've just put 2 screws in just because it's for demonstrational purposes, but obviously you can put 4. This should now have enough play to, there we go, slot in place. We're going to be using these holes 1, 2, 3, 4. There's also some ones in the middle just to help support the radiator, give it a bit more rigidity. Then in the same bag as the longer screws, we've got the small ones that we're just going to use to get the radiator installed. So now we can install the motherboard. So I'll grab my IO shield out of the motherboard box should you need it. Don't forget to get it. And then we're going to put this down in the gap. Make sure it's nice and secure. Now we can take our motherboard, get this ready to go in. So it's going to go upside down for this one. Make sure it goes into our IO shield properly. Then inside our case accessory pack, we're going to be looking for screws like this. And voila, just like that. Now I'm going to get the riser installed, so take off the little protective cover and make sure your clip's open and clip. So that's that installed. So to install the block, we're going to take off the little protective bit of plastic on the bottom. So thermal compound wise, you can either use what's included in the accessory bag with a cooler or your own. I'm going to use Noctua NTH2 because it's what I use for everything I test. It gives me a better idea of thermals in comparison to other cases and coolers and things like that, so just keeps consistent results. So then we can bring our pump top down, get one of the latches in place, and then the other side, and then we'll slowly apply even pressure to each one so it puts the pump down securely top of the IHS. There we go, and we've got a nice little pill. So the power supply we're going to be using for this build is the Cougar Gaming DX 650. I did use the 850 in another build and they're really good units. So I thought we'd go for the same for this one. So you've got a 5-year warranty, gold rated power supply. We've got a power cable, power supply screws. I'll show you the mechanism that it mounts to the case with. And of course our power supply. So fully modular one for this. Cougar also do units that have semi-modular or non-modular as well. If you've got space to tuck cables away, could save you a bit of money as well. So for our cables, we're going to need a 24 pin, our EPS 8 pin. This is a daisy chain one, should you need 2 on your motherboard. We're going to need 1 SATA, so I should get 1 out of that bundle there. And then we're going to need 1 of our PCI, because our graphics card has a 6 pin and an 8 pin. So our power supply for the Dust 2, we've got a little couple of screws there which will then come out, and then we've got a little plate that we mount the power supply to, then that just slots in and then kind of locks on. Put those screws back in and then we're sorted. Okay, so now I've unscrewed that bracket will just slide out and pop out. So it's going to go in this way. And obviously we're going to want some fresh air for our power supply, so we should be putting the fan on the outside. So we can then turn it around, line it up, and get our power supply screws and screw it in. So now, because we're not going to be able to access the bottom of this, we need to turn our power supply switch on. So then this will just go into there, and then that will then rotate, and we'll put it in. But I'm going to put all the modular cables on now, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit crammed to do it after the fact. So let's get our power supply cables connected. So first up is our 24 pin. This has the two ends going into the power supply. One side and the other. Our EPS 8 pin for our motherboard. We'll do that above the 24. A double 8 pin PCIe for the graphics card. And finally our SATA cable, will do that on the end. So I think I'm going to feed the cables through this little hole we've got on the top left, just for now, to the back of the case, and then we'll reroute them back through to where they need to go. So that's one screw, and then just put the other one back in. There we go, that is now done. So another day, but we're carrying on. So now we need to get all of our cables sorted for routing and things. So we're just going to pass the 24 pin back through. So our 8 pin I'm going to put through above where it's going to need to go, because I don't think it's going to reach if we go the long way around. What I should do is plug this in, and I think I'll have it so it's laying across the I/O, something like that. So we can tuck the rest of that underneath, and then that's fairly clean. This is pretty much the same deal. We do need to train this cable a little bit. Let's get that clipped in. We shall have to bend this down, something like that. Obviously being very careful that we don't jam any cables in the fans, because we do want those to spin. So then we've got these 3 cables that need to go through to the other side. Tuck those down along by the Wi-Fi card, so that's a little bit cleaner now. Our front panel, you can't really see, it's tucked under by the 24 pin. Going to vary on which pins you use depending on your motherboard. Also tucking the header for the front panel sound out as well, because it's not something I use. Obviously you can plug that in if you do use it yourself. And also, because we're using a B450 motherboard that doesn't have a USB-C header on it, that's another cable that we're going to be tucking down that we're not using. So I've passed the addressable connector through the case, and now we're going to plug that in. It's to the left-hand side of the Wi-Fi card. It's going to be a bit difficult for you guys to see, but I can assure you it is there. So we'll get that plugged in. There we go. So that is that. Now we can go to the back. We are using the Gigabyte RTX 3070. This is the Eagle variant, and this has got 8 gigabytes of DDR6 on this one. I've used this card in a couple of builds now, and it's proved to be a very good performer. So we shall use it again in this one. Just to bear in mind, the maximum supported graphics card for this case is 330mm and then 60mm wide, so dual slot. No support for triple slot with this kind of case. So first things we need to do is get the expansion covers out so we can actually put our graphics card in. There's 2 screws on the top side of the back of the case. We're going to undo those, and it will just allow the back to pivot open a little bit, enough to get our screwdrivers in to get the expansion covers off. Nice and easy. So there's the 2 covers. Keep this handy in case you ever need to replace them. Also, I'm going to plug in our power supply connections as well while I'm here. So there's the 6. It's these 2 together for the 8, and then you should be able to find its home like that. And it clicked in. Nice. Another couple of touches I want to do is just tuck the excess power supply cables down this little gap. That's actually the side of the power supply where there's actually a drive, but it has made a little pocket that we can use for hiding the excess cables. All that's left to do on this side is just connect all of our fans. So we've got the cable that's coming off the pump, which is here. Then it's going to be a case of putting our other 3 pins into that. There's also a daisy chain on these as well, so we can find our other one on the other fan and connect that in as well. Our 2 4 pins, this is going to be using our daisy chain one here, and we'll plug that in on the motherboard. Then the only other thing is the SATA for the pump, so we'll just connect that together like that, and then we'll do a little bit of tidying up with the cables, and then it's time for the big reveal and see if it works. Okay, so I spent a little bit of time doing some cable management, not as much as I would do if I was using this, as a daily driver, but for the purposes of the video, tried it up a little bit. You can obviously spend a lot longer doing it, but I've tucked all the cables up. I've used the radiator mounts as kind of points for the zip ties, Because there's a little bit of height with the screws, the same from the zip ties isn't going to matter when we put the filter on anyway. Okay, so I've got everything powered up. As you can see, we have got lights on the RGB RAM, which is always a good sign. So now let's press the power button and see if it boots. We have signs. Graphics card has lit up as well on the back. You can't see that from the angle you're at though. Motherboard, the RAM, the pump and the fans. So let's hopefully now get a display. Bingo. And I missed it. So now we're into the BIOS. We need to go to advanced memory settings to enable XMP, which is right at the top. Profile 1, that will set our RAM to its rated speed of 3600 mega transfers, 1.35 volts, F10 and enter. Then we go on to the benchmarks. So first of all, we're going to do Far Cry 6. I've got everything set to the high preset, motion blur off because it's garbage, and then we've got the extended features off. So let's run the benchmark. Overall temperature of things as well at the very end, especially as we're using the case that doesn't have any fans on the side. It will be quite interesting to see how hot everything gets. So we go, that's our 1440p results for Far Cry 6. As you can see, we've got an average of 110 and then a maximum of 122. So you could always drop your frame rate down a little bit if you wanted to get some higher frames, or maybe use a 144 Hz monitor. Obviously we've got some VRAM headroom that you can see on the bottom of the screen there, so you can play with settings a little bit more if you want to get some more detail out of it. So pretty happy with those results, and let's move on to our next game. So on to Valorant, I've got everything set to high and VSync is off. So let's see how we get on. Averaging about 450 frames for 60. Instantly killed. I wasn't even watching where I was going, I was looking at frame rates. Valorant isn't a difficult game to run, so as you can see we've got really crazy frame rates. So I don't really think we need to show that much of it. Let's just jump straight into our next game. So on to Dirt 5, I've selected everything as high minus VSync. This is just a random playgrounds event. So let's see how we get on with this. Averaging now 190 frames, bit of a dip to 177. Average of about 180 frames, so very good. Now let's move on to our next game. So Apex Legends, I've gone for, again, high on everything that I can do. VSync is off, and then I've turned on the additional extra settings for detail. So let's have a look, see how we get on. Okay, so we're dropping in, we're averaging, I can't quite see, about 140 frames at the moment. Now we could turn the settings down a little bit if you wanted to get any higher frame rate than that. Temperature wise, we've got a graphics card is sitting at about 71, 72 degrees. CPU's at 64. I've seen a lot higher than that, so it's not doing too bad. Can't seem to find anyone, so I think we should call it there and move on to our next game. So I'm going to chuck in Crisis. Can it run Crisis? We will find out. First jump, we're out of the plane. Let's have a look. We're at about 130, I think it's a good place to say. I'm quite surprised actually, considering this is on very high. I'd usually just go for a high setting, but it did recommend using very high, so I did it, and it seems to be running very well. So now, going along the beach, we do have a little bit of a dip, but we're still averaging about 100 frames. I presume that's because we're loading more details as we're getting closer to objects and things, so that's understandable, but still a very good playable frame rate. I'm going to jump into Can It Run Crisis mode just for the giggles and see how that runs. Okay, switched over. It's actually running about 80 frames, so I'm quite surprised. So if you're a 60 frames a second kind of person, then we're going to have no worries running this Can It Run Crisis mode, so pretty impressed, to be honest. So there we have it, guys. That was the build and then the benchmarks of our awesome little PC in the Cougar Gaming Dust 2. I hope you all enjoyed this video. A couple of thoughts before I end the video. I'm going to do a separate review on the case, as there are a few changes that I would like to see and a couple of things that you can do to make your life easier when you're building it. So if you are considering getting this case for a build, definitely check out that video. It does get quite warm. We saw a maximum of 86.5 when testing with Cinebench, but that is a synthetic benchmark, and realistically you might not see the same results using real world programs and things like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that kind of high temperature. For day-to-day use, I think you're going to be more than, it's going to be more than adequate. You don't have any fans on either side as well pushing air in, so that's why it does get a little bit warmer. But the fact that you've got a small form factor PC with such performance is really nice. So yeah, overall very pleased with how this has gone. So big thank you to the companies that sent parts out. We've got Patriot, Gigabyte, obviously Cougar for the case, AIO and the PSU. And then big thank you to Scan for sending out the 5800X. And as I said, they've been a great company supporting me with the builds that I've been doing on the channel, and more to come as well. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, guys. If you did, don't forget to subscribe and ding the bell so you don't miss a future video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.